Welcome to On the Edge with April Mahoney Brains. Here, this is the spot where the conversation is pointed, the guests are sharp, and the responses are never dull. Welcome home, Brains. There's only one requirement to hang out on the edge, is that you open your big brain and close your small mind. Did you bring your thinking caps? It's time to put them on, because the conversation starts now. On the Edge with April Mahoney Brains. Here we are. We're back at the spot, the place where the conversation is what? Pointed. The guests are what? Sharp, and the responses are never dull. Today, our guest is Coach Jess. Okay, beautiful. She is beaming in from Las Vegas. She's such a jet setter. I can't keep up with her. I've been trying to figure out where she is, but she's going to talk to us about dyslexia. And what is dyslexia? And I will self-disclose, Brains. I had a form of it. I absolutely did growing up as a child. It was absolutely horrible. I could not hear words or sounds, should I say, phonetically. And I would transpose my letters when I would go to, write, or I would go to spell. I just couldn't get it. And sometimes as an adult, 58 years old, I still have a challenge and I got to go back and check myself. That's why I pay my editor well. But again, it is something that you can deal with. It is a learning challenge. It's a learning, as Jess corrected me and said, it's a learning difference. And so it can be corrected, but what are the signs and what are the symptoms? Because our kids are struggling. They're in school. You think that they're being disruptive, they're being disrespectful, but it's really maybe because they don't get it. I don't know if this is hereditary. My daughter had a version of it. I put her in a special school, Sylvan Learning Center, shout out to Sylvan Learning Center, and it turned her life around within 6 months. So there are tools, there are options, but also there are great people like Jess that specialize in this, that know what they're doing. So let's welcome her to the edge today. Jess, I forgot your last name. Wait, because I've been calling you Jess for so long. I got it written down, Jess Arce.
Good job.
Yeah, did I do that right? Did I read that right, teacher?
You did, and most people don't. So I give you props for that.
But, all right, here we are. So again, introduce yourself to my brains and really the special skill set that you have and how you uncovered it and how you're working with others.
Well, I'm happy to do that. Thanks, April. So my name is Jess Arce, and I go by Coach Jess. And I am the CEO of I Am Not Dumb, Inc. and the program director of Lexia Learners. And so we specialize in working with students of all ages from 7 to 77 who have dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and similar brain-based learning differences.
Wow. So break it down. You gave me 4 great titles, big $25 words. Give me a definition of what each one entails.
So I actually said 3 things. So dyslexia, well, let me start off with the names are Latin. And so dys means not. And so dyslexia means not, and lexia means words. So it's basically a struggle with words. So that can be difficulty hearing words, difficulty saying words, difficulty reading words, and it can roll over to difficulty with writing words. Then we've got dysgraphia, which is not, and graphia is writing. So it's difficulty with writing. And like I said, the dyslexia kind of rolls over into dysgraphia sometimes. So dysgraphia is difficulty with writing. It could be really poor handwriting, or it could be struggles getting your thoughts from your brain to your piece of paper. So that's where dysgraphia falls. And then dyscalculia, which is the hardest one for people to pronounce, is, you guessed it, difficulty with calculating, with math. Oh. So, and very often you will see some characteristics of the math challenges with people who have dyslexia. They might have trouble memorizing their multiplication facts, but dyscalculia is more struggles than just multiplication. Dyscalculia, most of the people, their experience is like they're learning a foreign language. So they just don't understand the concept of math, of adding. I had my first math student, I never planned on teaching math, but she was a language arts student. She had dyslexia and she could not add 4 + 6. And she was 18 years old. Mm-hmm. And I said, that is not okay. We need to help you. Right. And so I started looking for solutions that would help her learn to do math. And by the end of a year and a half, she was doing all the way up to pre-algebra.
Well, you know what? And I'll tell you something that I figured out a long time ago is that math, to me, isn't another language. Because if you understand the definition of the terms, sum, equation, quotient, you can definitely fill in the blanks. And it's a comprehension type of thing. If you don't understand how to read, it is difficult learning how to count because they go hand in hand. And so, dyscalculia, did I say that correctly?
Close enough.
So, I mean, that's brilliant. That's really brilliant that you're working in that field, in that arena. You know, so many children are struggling, and I'm just going to use children as an example right now. They're struggling with learning. They don't have, in some schools, some of the extra tutoring that they used to have. I mean, there were special classes that would pull you out and you'd have an aide that would work with you 45 minutes, an hour a day to help you sharpen those skills. And then, you know, my daughter, for example, she was in the class and she wasn't disruptive, but she was distracted. She'd go play with the turtle or she'd go write on the chalkboard because the other kids were reading faster than her. And when it was her turn to read out loud, she couldn't do it. And then she would flip her pages 3 or 4 pages ahead so that she would be caught up with the other children, but she missed it. So there was a problem with comprehension. But she doesn't know how to explain that. This is something totally new to her. What can parents look for and identify some of the signs and some of the symptoms if your children have any one of the 3 issues that you described?
Well, one couple things I'd like to say before I start on that is actually dyslexia and dyscalculia, the difficulty with the reading and the math are very different. It uses different parts of the brain to do math versus to read. So they are different struggles. However, one thing you touched on, which is very challenging for students today, more so than when our children were in school, is they're required to do a lot of word problems, which then becomes an issue because if you can't read well, you fall behind in math. But so some of the key characteristics with all of the LDs, all of the family members, is someone in your family has one of them, because yes, they are hereditary. Most people with dyslexia inherit it from a relative. There's a small portion who get it because of a brain injury, but they're kind of categorized different because dyslexic people, and I usually just use the term dyslexic as an umbrella term for all of the disses, but dyslexic people are usually of average or above average intelligence. And so they just need to be taught differently because those parts of their brain haven't lit up. They're not working naturally like they do with neurotypical kids. So we need to light up those parts of their brain, help them to get those parts working. So a lot of times people don't know that their dad was dyslexic because there was so much shame associated with it. So sometimes you have a close relative and you don't even know it. But some people will have a speech delay. Perhaps they're not learning how to talk until they're 2 or 3, or they mispronounce words. That's very common amongst dyslexics, is to say a word wrong or to say a phrase completely wrong. Like a very popular or common phrase, they will just like totally mess it up by saying the wrong word, or they'll switch the words around. Stuttering can be a sign of it, but I think the stuttering issue is more of a self-esteem component that plays out in as stuttering. A constant confusion of left and right, getting lost really easily, a delayed established hand to choose to write with, difficulty tying shoelaces, which that's something we don't see a lot anymore because kids start off with Velcro shoes. But back when my kids were younger and I would survey dyslexic people, almost all of the dyslexic people I had met were delayed with learning to tie their shoelaces, because it's a skill that's just it's a harder skill to get. Maybe they can't rhyme words. That's something very common amongst dyslexics. Slow, choppy handwriting. Sometimes they reverse their letters or numbers, or they read them backwards. Extremely choppy, slow reading. Reading out loud is harder. They might misread prepositions. That's a really common one. So they might exchange at for to, or of for for, or what, things like that. They ignore suffixes in the words. When we're moving on to characteristics of dysgraphia, their hands might get tired when they're writing a lot. They speak out loud as they're writing words. They omit words from their writing, or maybe they can't write nearly as well as they can verbally communicate. That's a really key indicator for dysgraphia. They have difficulty organizing their thoughts. It's really hard for people with the dys's to copy work off of the board. So the teachers might think that they're having vision problems, but it's not that. It's the processing of the brain that makes it really hard to copy off of the board. Even if they're doing virtual school right now and their teacher has an assignment on the screen for them and they need to copy it down, it's really hard. Difficulty mastering a foreign language. Now, going into math, they might avoid playing games altogether. They might have trouble reading a map, or they might have a lot of difficulty with algebra, but geometry is easy for them. And they might have trouble mastering the multiplication facts or understanding fractions or decimals. They confuse parts to the whole relationship of math, and they have difficulty keeping score during games. So that's some of the characteristics, and I am happy to send anyone who's interested a complete list of the different characteristics of dyslexia, dysgraphia, and or dyscalculia, so that you guys can fill out the checklist, because that gives you a really clear knowledge.
You mentioned some things that would just straight went over my brain, and things that I think about now. I'm like, maybe I'm experiencing that now. I thought it was menopause.
Well, you mentioned that you outgrew dyslexia. You don't outgrow it.
Right.
What you did as a child was you learned to compensate. Right. You learned ways to do things so that you could survive in this world. And so as you get older, sometimes it starts to come back more. My mother was diagnosed with dyslexia in the 40s, and she is now 83 years old. And so she's starting to experience more things now, because when you're tired, your brain isn't working as much. And when you get older, sometimes your brain gets a little tired. It's not as sharp as it was when you were 25, when you were like on the ball with everything. So, you know, it's kind of, you got the upward flow of learning how to function. Then you're doing amazing because you've learned your best. And then now you start to get older and you start going down the hill a little, unfortunately.
And you know what? That's why I always encourage people. My mother is 91. She doesn't want to do anything now, but we always do things to kind of stimulate her brain. We do puzzles. We do word searches. She loves when I read to her, and reading is so important. It stimulates your brain. My father is 80, let's see, he's probably 82 or 83 and still an avid reader, sharp as he can be. You know, this dementia is not going to take him out because he's sharp, but he's stimulating that muscle, and brains know that the brain is a muscle that needs to be worked, that needs to be fed, that needs to be stimulated. So let's talk about your book. You had an opportunity to write a book, and tell our brains a little bit about that. Do you have it there with you?
I don't. I am in the final stages of my book.
Okay.
I actually wrote the book several years ago, one afternoon, and it took me no time to write my first draft, and it has taken me years to go through the second and third draft. So I now have a team of employees, and they are helping me get through the final stages of this book. And our goal is to have it ready by April 15th. So the book is called I Am Not Dumb, I Am Dyslexic. And it will be available on Amazon, and it will be available as an audiobook as well. Because a lot of times dyslexic people don't like to pick up books and read. I got to tell you, I have finished reading my first 2 books in my life during COVID. I have never read
I've
never read a book from cover to cover before in my life.
Wow. Well, bravo. Yeah. Bravo for you.
Thank you.
Why is that though?
Because I'm dyslexic, and reading is a struggle for me. And my whole life, I only read out of necessity. When I was in high school, I read the footnotes of books so I could write my paper based on the footnotes and not have to read the entire book. I am an excellent writer. Writing has come naturally for me, but reading, not so much. Now, my mother, who I said is dyslexic, she is an avid reader. She loves to read. It is not a struggle for her like it is for me. And that's one of the things about dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, is that we have different characteristics. We don't all check off every box of the characteristics. So at my dinner table, there's my mother, my husband, and 3 of my 4 children and myself. So 7 of us will sit down to dinner together, and 6 of the 7 of us have dyslexia. And we all have different characteristics. There may be some overlap, but you know, each one of us will have certain characteristics that other people don't have. So let me ask a question though. When
you're checking off the boxes as a parent and you look at this, you don't want to overthink it, you know, and that's not to minimize what's going on. You actually want your child tested. You want them, you know, you want to be diagnosed. It could be something else. It could be a vision problem. It could be a hearing problem. It could be autism. It could be a lot of other things. So, you know, when you're doing this, we want you to definitely check in with people like Coach Jess to kind of really assess it and make sure that you're doing the deep dive before you try to go in and do something that, you know, is counterproductive. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I agree with some of what you're saying, but not all of it, because the testing in California costs between $2,500 and $3,500.
What?
Yes. there is no insurance that covers it. So personally, I would rather parents take the self-test, have a phone call with me, and we can pretty much determine if it's dyslexia, and spend that $2,500 to $3,500 on tutoring, which will help fix the problem, than to just have a piece of paper that says, yes, your child is dyslexic, because that's a lot of money and it does not require much to determine dyslexia. It really doesn't. When you know, I mean, I can talk to someone on the phone and I can tell them, no, it doesn't sound like dyslexia. Yep, it does. And not to say that if they have dyslexia, that's everything, because my youngest son has 8 neurodiversities. He's got dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, auditory processing delay, sensory processing disorder, visual processing disorder, and I believe he is on the spectrum, although when he was tested for autism, they said he was not. So tests aren't always 100% foolproof either.
Right.
And so I taught my son how to read. And by 10th grade, he was reading on an 11th grade reading level. Wow. The average American reads on an 8th grade reading level, but he still had his vision problems. He was still reversing letters. He was still reversing numbers. He was still having a depth perception issue. So we sent him to a vision therapist who helped him with all of those things. So a lot of times people will go to vision therapists to fix the vision problems and expect that to fix the reading issues. And they're two different things.
You know, I want to ask a question, Jess. You do a lot of extensive work with parents, but how do you explain this to your child? You know, there's bullying in schools. There's low self-esteem. There's judgments. You know, there's a lack of patience and understanding with some educators. And I'm not trying to get on their case. It's justifiable. You've got 6 classes and about 27 kids on average in each one of those classes. You're going back into an environment that's, you know, COVID ridden. They don't know what's going on. How do you talk your child through this and help them understand that this is a learning challenge that can be corrected? Like you said, it is a learning difference. And for them to accept that, what would you say?
You know, my daughter struggled since she was 3, and I was a preschool teacher, and so I knew that she learned differently. And it took until she was 12 for me to find out that she was dyslexic. And I searched and searched, and we held her back. And when we found out she was dyslexic, that's all she needed. All she needed was to know, number 1, that it had a label. Number 2, that she wasn't alone, that there wasn't something wrong with her. And number 3, that we now had a solution for her. So when she was 12 years old, after spending years in school, not really learning how to read, because we sent her to teachers and they tried to teach her the exact same way after school as they tried to teach her in school, and it didn't help. So what I found, when students come to us, they typically will have very low self-esteem. And that's the first thing that will start to change. And that's what I tell parents. They can look forward to, within a couple of weeks to maybe even a month, that their child will start to feel better about themselves. Their confidence will go up. Because, like I said before, dyslexic people are bright. And so they're sitting in a classroom, and the classrooms are set up where everyone knows the kid who can't read, who's not doing well, because they've got the books lined up A to Z. So if little Johnny is going to read book A and his buddy is going to read book P, they're going to tease him because he's still reading book A. Well, these kids are like, why can't I learn how to read? Why can't I do this basic thing? And they just start to feel down on themselves. Plus the teachers don't help, because like you said, you know, the teachers don't understand. Most teachers don't understand what dyslexia is. And they think the kids are being lazy, or they think the kids are dumb, or they think they're not trying, or the parents aren't reading it to them enough at home.
Right.
But none of those things are going to help. What helps is the right type of instruction. And so when our kids start tutoring, they immediately realize, I understand, I am going to learn, I'm not dumb. And so that gives them hope. So having a label is, a lot of people will say, well, you know, we don't want to label kids, but it makes us feel a part of something, because so often they don't realize that they're not alone, because everyone's so busy trying to hide the fact that they can't read or they can't spell well, that they are embarrassed and they don't share that information. Right. We actually have a support group because that's something I've experienced so much, is that people don't realize that they're not alone.
Right.
And so the support group helps people be able to talk it out.
And you know, something else that you said that you touched on is about being labeled. Well, let's talk about the underserved and overlooked communities. You know, you are going to find Black and brown children are really labeled. You know, they are set aside. They are in, not all of them, you know, they are in some schools that, you know, discard this altogether. Again, like I said, they consider them as disruptive. You know, do you see that there is a disparity between Black and brown children and maybe Asian, Indian, and white? Because I know Indian children from India are extremely bright, you know, and Asian children really excel in mathematics and English. Caucasian children are afforded, not all of them, but some of them, more affluent schools, smaller class sizes, different, you know, learning tools and ability. Do you see that there's a disparity between more minorities?
You know, in my experience as a dyslexic specialist, is there's more of a disparity due to socioeconomics. Mm-hmm. And so based on the fact that, you know, Black and brown people tend to be in a lower socioeconomic class, that will often, you know, be a higher percentage of people being affected like that. But just as many—
Wait. Let me stop you right there. You say being affected or being diagnosed?
Well, most people aren't being diagnosed with dyslexia, period. The schools aren't diagnosing. The schools have spent over 30 years trying to
so, you know, as I said, diagnosis, because I think that is kind of where the sticking point is. And again, the resources to get that, you know, to get that handled and to work with these children. Is that something you see, or?
So what, everything varies from state to state, but there's very few states that any students are getting diagnosed in the school district. Texas and Mississippi diagnose students. I believe Colorado might be as well, but most states are not diagnosing in school. And like I said, it's very costly in California to diagnose a student. What I find is it's based on socioeconomics more than the color of people's skin, whether they get the help they need. And so for example, my mother was raised in a very affluent family. My grandfather was a doctor. My grandfather went to Yale. My mother was diagnosed with dyslexia in the 40s at Yale. That's unheard of. But it's because her father was a doctor who attended Yale that she was able to get help.
Right.
My husband is Mexican American. Education was not top priority for his family, and he was never diagnosed. He never got the help. He was told he was lazy. He was told he was dumb. He didn't get any, you know, anything until I started tutoring him 3 years ago. And I tutored him for 1.5 years, and he moved up 4 reading levels and went from being, in an elementary school reading level to reading above the average American high school student.
Wow.
And for me, I was raised in a middle-class family. I went to private school. The private school didn't help me, but my mother paid for tutors to get me the help I needed. So I definitely see that. I see some cultural, just as families where their culture does not want to accept either their child not performing academically the way they expect, or a culture where families don't want to spend the money or don't even have the money. But if everything is straight across and they're all middle-class families, some cultures don't want to spend the money on helping their child get the help they need because they don't.
It was expensive for me. I mean, and I did it. I was going to do whatever it took, but it was $42 an hour for tutoring for my daughter. But that was the best investment I have ever made. And yes, we're, a middle-class family that was able to afford it, but also identifying that there's no shame associated with that. And people learn at different paces. They learn, what interests them. Encouraging children to read comic books. I know when I had a reading challenge, do you know what my favorite magazine was? Out of all the magazines in the world, there was two. Number one was Right On magazine, because Michael Jackson was in it. And number two was Newsweek. Newsweek, I'm telling you, it built my vocabulary. It made me smart. It made me worldly. I don't know why in the world the words were challenging, phonetically, all of that, but it was giving me choices and giving me options. Well, you have just been a wealth of information, and I appreciate you and I value what you do so much, because this is going to help so many parents and adults. People don't realize how many adults don't identify and don't recognize and don't acknowledge that they are illiterate, that they can't read at all, whether it's dyslexia or they really never learned how to read. You look at some of these celebrities, I won't mention him, but tons of money, and never stepped out of his comfort zone, can write songs and music and entertain a crowd, but never stepped out of his comfort zone to learn how to read. And now you're in a world of trouble because you can't read the contract that you're about to sign.
Well, he could very well be dyslexic, because dyslexic people are usually very talented artists, musicians. My daughter could not read music, and she went to a performing arts high school, and they said she needs to learn how to read the music in order to, do the keep up with the choir. And she didn't need it because her dyslexic people have strengths to balance out their weaknesses. And so he may very well be dyslexic. What is his name? Danny Glover is illiterate, and he's dyslexic. And he is an amazing actor, but he had to spend a lot more time learning his lines because he couldn't read his lines. There's a gentleman he's a paleontologist, and he cannot read. He's illiterate. He has a doctorate's degree, but they gave him his doctorates as a, I forget the word, but he didn't really earn it going through school. But he discovered the first dinosaur eggs because he was dyslexic and out of the box thinking. And so he was crawling on the ground when everyone else was standing up tall looking for these dinosaur bones.
Wow.
So, a lot of it's misunderstood because people don't know what dyslexia really is. And so we just make assumptions that they didn't bother to try. My father told me when I went to college, he told me just read magazines because I hated to read. And at least he said, if you at least read magazines, you will learn to be a better reader. My son learned to read after I taught him, he didn't like to read books until he picked up comic books. And comic books are amazing. They're wonderful for dyslexic people because there's short pieces of reading that you have to do versus a whole intimidating page of reading.
Right. Well, you, again, like I said, have been a wealth of knowledge here on the edge with me and my brains. I appreciate and I value you so much. Will you come back and keep us informed, especially when the book is released? I want to hear about what's in the pages of that book. I encourage all parents to contact you and to really go through the checklist to see how they can identify if they themselves are dyslexic or have any of these other learning differences versus your children. Again, she said that this can be hereditary. And so we want to work through it. We want to become better readers. We want to build self-esteem. We want character. We want to stop the bullying and the name calling. We want to, pump the brakes on the grammar police because, people will call you out in a minute. Oh, you did this, you did that, and make you feel bad about yourself when they don't understand that there is something else brewing in the background. Please tell my brains how to get in contact with you again so that they can work with you because again, you are brilliant and you are super, super smart.
Well, thank you. So my website is lexialearners.com. All of my handles are Lexia Learners. The best way to meet with me is to schedule a free 30-minute consultation, and that's via bit.ly/Lexia Learners call, and the L's are capital and the C is capital. So, but you can find me on Facebook. Easy. If you didn't copy down that information, just look for Lexia Learners. I'm trying to point to my sign up there. Anyway, look for us in our logo on Facebook, on Instagram. We're on YouTube. We got a little bit of presence on Twitter. So
I'm going to blow you up. I'm going to share you with everyone all over the world because awesome. You are only a point and click away. We would love, tips of the day or information that we can get from you and tap into that big brain because again, like I said, you're super smart. And I want to, again, thank you. Brains, I'm going to put all of her contact information at the end of this video as well as on all the links there on social media. So it's just a point and a click. Help your children, help yourself. Reading is such a gift. It will transport you into another place in time. Writing is a way of self-expression, and you got to learn how to count your coin. Mm-hmm. Here on the edge. Thank you so much again, Jess. You are.
Thank you, April.
All right. Bye, brains.